Hello and welcome to the Spiraling Higher podcast, hosted by me, Sam, mindset and manifestation coach.
And me, Gina, your biz and mindset coach. We're here to support you on your spiritual journey by bringing you intimate and raw conversations about healing, manifestation, consciousness, and spirituality.
We hope this podcast makes you feel less alone as you become aware of your patterns and limiting beliefs to up-level your life, manifest like a boss, and together, spiral higher.
Okay, so literally before I hit record, we were just laughing our freaking little faces off because I was telling Gina about how I was getting my face lasered today. And we were just laughing because every time we sit and have these medical procedures or aesthetic medical procedures, we just have that really dumbfounded moment where we're just like, what are we doing?
What am I doing?
What is this?
I know.
Like, why am I injecting my face with like intense light beams? Like, what is going on?
Why am I literally shooting a laser at my own face?
Okay, so I was sitting there and she was super kind and she was saying a lot of really actually soothing statements to me as this was going on because she could see my face wincing, and it was very spicy is the word I'll use, because you're like burning hair on your face. It's obviously a very high temperature and there's multiple passes that they do. And so I'm literally wincing, and then I had to take a moment to take a break. And she just kept saying such sweet things like, it's okay, like you're safe. And I realized, wow, you have to constantly tell your body that, because right now, unconsciously, my body's like, we're being attacked by a laser.
There's lasers shooting at our face.
There's a laser beam on my face.
Well, I remember when I got my eyebrows microbladed the first time.
Oh my God, same.
Am I literally letting a person slice my face?
I actually
doing?
Didn't I tell you when I was in Korea, I was doing it and I started crying because I realized how self-abusive it was. But it was too late. She'd already done one brow.
I love microblading, so don't get me wrong. But every time I get it done, I'm like, what am I doing? Even tattoos. I mean, as much as I love my tattoos, I'm like, I'm literally letting a person take a needle and inject color into my skin. It's just funny and weird.
It's just so weird. I remember when I don't remember exactly how old I was. I was either at the end of high school or very early university, but it was a sociology class where we had to read something called The Tribe of the Nicerema. And it was a very short, like 1 to 2 page sort of article, I guess, on the strange practices of this group of people or this tribe, you could say. And the way that they described the practices were so aggressive and almost like vile, like, oh my God, why would they do this? And then you realize it's essentially like a play on American. So Nicerema is American backwards, and they're basically just describing dental practices.
Oh my God. At first I was like thinking, what the hell are these practices? But
that's the point.
I know.
That's actually the point. They make you read it and you're like, oh my God, who would ever do this? This is so aggressive and inhuman. And then you're like, oh, it's dentistry.
Well, it sounds like torture. Like,
exactly.
Literally sounds like a form of torture.
But that's what you and I were thinking when we're getting our faces lasered. There's like this moment where you realize like, okay, I'm obviously consciously okay with this and I've signed off on it. But there is a part of my like unconscious mind that's like, this is pain and torture. What is going on?
Well, it's crazy how many things we've kind of just normalized through socialization, but it actually, when you zoom out of it, seems really crazy.
100%, which is so perfect of a segue to talk about our conversation with Kymber, because so much of what her work centers around and this conversation was about is how we've been socialized, especially as women, to think of certain types of diets or certain types of aesthetic body types to be healthy, when in actuality, eating in this way or exercising in this way is actually extremely harmful to our nervous system. And so this conversation was just so life-changing for Gina and me, because over the past year, we've really been healing our unconscious disordered eating. We've both had conscious eating disorders where we were actively trying to not eat.
Yeah.
And then as we grew older, we would, skip meals because we were busy, right? Work came ahead of food and nutrition. I felt like I was really obsessed with health and like being healthy and fit. And so I was really picky about what I ate, which ended up just turning into not eating a lot. And I had no idea how much, or my lack thereof, how much my food intake was affecting my energy and mental health symptoms. I did not see the correlation because we're socialized to think that food just determines how you look, not necessarily how you feel.
Yeah. And I think it's one of the things that really came up for me after this conversation was how it is so hard for us to even take care of ourselves. Like I always think about my daughter and how I always give her the best of everything. Like David, my husband, always says like she eats like a freaking royal person, like, organic everything. As she should. But then for me, I'm just like chopping off like the worst parts of the fruit, or it's just crazy. Like I was the healthiest I've ever been diet-wise when I was pregnant because there was a being inside of me that I was feeding. And I found that really interesting that when it's just me in here, I just cared a lot less about that. And so, yeah, this conversation illuminated so much for me because I feel like food tends to be something we only think about, like you said, in relation to being healthy or looking healthy. I did not at all connect how much food affects our nervous system.
Yes, the nervous system especially, which is what we've been talking about for, I feel like, an effing year.
Yes.
How we've been so upregulated with anxiety and how that leads to a natural crash, which you could also identify as depression. All of these mood swings that we've experienced and moments and periods of low energy and not understanding ourselves. I was almost a bit embarrassed to realize that the solutions to a lot of my problems was much simpler than I thought it was.
Yeah.
I was doing a lot of inner work.
Food and rest.
Exactly. Food and rest, because I was doing all this inner work. It's like, I'm doing breath work, I'm doing tapping, I'm doing parts work, I'm doing this. And the whole time my body was like, can you just eat?
Yeah. Can you maybe take a nap?
Can you take a nap? And the funniest thing was, I'll never forget, somewhere towards like the third quarter of the year last year, I was complaining to my husband about how I don't have a lot of energy. I just felt like I'm just getting older. Like I just don't have the energy I used to have, like blah, blah, blah. And you know what he said to me? He literally said, you don't eat enough. Why don't you eat a meal and then come back and tell me that? And I was so mad because I was like, how dare you? Like, how dare you, trivialize my issues to something as silly and stupid as eating. I also had a misconception. I think, Gina, you talked about this in the episode as well. Like, we almost don't have an awareness of how much or how little we are eating because whatever we're doing is obviously normalized to us, right? So I remember when I first met you, Gina still to this day doesn't eat a lot, but even more so back then, you ate like a bird. I was like, I'd be with you the entire day and you'd be like, these gummy worms look delicious. And I was like, that's not a food group. You were like, it works for me.
It's one of mine. It's one of mine.
But we have to remember that however we've been eating for, let's say, like the last decade, that's normal for us, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's normal for our bodies, right? Just because we've been doing it for a long time doesn't mean it's healthy. And then unfortunately with eating, it takes a while for your body to begin to show symptoms, right? Your body's very resilient. And what we learn is that your body will just take energy from your own effing muscles if you don't feed it. So you won't really notice physically that you're feeling low energy until your body's begun to really deteriorate. And then you begin to experience hair loss or mood disorders or something like that. So if you are someone who's experienced disordered eating or maybe are unconsciously experiencing that, and you have both mental and physical symptoms that relate to low energy levels, difficulty concentrating and brain fog, I think you're going to be really, really shocked and surprised to find out that what you're eating or not eating is contributing to that. And the key to this conversation and our goal for all of our conversations is to empower you with more knowledge to be able to change your life, to be able to change your habits and feel healthier, feel happier.
Yeah, I think for me, what was really illuminating in this conversation was, I guess, the depth that our food affects us. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but Emmeline often, like my daughter, if I am kind of cranky, she'll be like, Mom, did you eat? And so I think the hangry piece is a pretty commonly known thing. I think a lot of us will just say, oh, I'm hangry right now, or oh, I just need to eat something. I'm kind of grumpy. You and I remember there was a day where we were both kind of feeling a little bit edgy and we both were like, we just needed to eat something. And so I feel like that has been common knowledge to me, but not the depth of accumulation of not eating properly for my body and the long-term effects that it would have on my anxiety.
Right.
Like I didn't connect that dot to that depth. And I feel like that's what Kymber so beautifully did for us. And I will name that as the conversation went on, it just felt like it was getting juicier and juicier. And she was just dropping nugget after nugget. So definitely as you go deeper into the episode, you're going to hear a lot of these wisdom drops and things that you'll be able to apply in your life right away.
Yes, I think that at the end of this episode, if you've been dealing with almost like mysterious symptoms, you will feel so much more seen and validated if you haven't looked in this area of your life. Because, like Gina said, we are all familiar with experiencing quote unquote hanger. But what I find so interesting about it is that when people accuse us of being hangry, our natural inclination is to be like, no, that's not it.
Yeah.
Right. And then you
True.
eat and then you are like, oh, that was it. So it feels a bit like that, where you may be looking for a lot of solutions in other places, when in reality, your body is the divine tool and giving you the wisdom that you need. You don't need a lot of things outside of you. You just need to fuel and take care of yourself better. And so I feel like that has been the theme of the past year in general, learning how to take care of our bodies, which is us. I think that when we live a very dissociated life in this modern world, it's very easy to separate mind from body and think that you are this separate mind. Your body is this thing that you just kind of have to deal with, which leads to a lot of bypassing of being in a human body, which is something that Kymber also talks about. You know, she also shares her experience of having dealt with symptoms from as early as the age of 15 and how the Western medical system does not really look for root causes. They simply look to hide symptoms. So if you're someone who's been feeling like, I don't know what's going on with me, and yet you hop around from doctor to doctor, you just get medication, but you're looking for something a bit more long-term and sustainable, this is going to give you a totally new radical perspective. And that's what we hope.
Yeah. And I think the last thing I'll say is, I feel like this conversation really helped me to increase my appreciation for my body. Because even when she talked about how our bodies are so efficient that when we don't fuel it appropriately with food, it does then start to get energy from our muscles and from different areas of our body. And as sad as that sounds, that my body's literally eating itself, it's also so incredible that our bodies are able to do that. Like, imagine having a car that runs out of gas, but then it like takes gas from like the wheels or something and can keep driving. Yeah. Like, that's wild, right? Because then you would never fill up the tank because you're like, my car is driving totally fine.
But eventually you'd be like, where did the tire go?
Yes.
The car's not moving anymore because it ate the tire.
Yeah, the tires are gone.
Literally how you feel. I mean, this is crazy, but yesterday was the perfect day to have this conversation with Kymber because it's so funny. After we were done recording, I remember I was like, I need to eat right now. And I ate like a power bar while we were finishing up our conversation. But later that night, I didn't tell you this. So last night, my legs were hurting so bad. And so then, okay, me Googling, why do my legs hurt? Like, why does my lower leg have this dull pain? And the number one thing that came up was like not eating enough. It was like you need sodium and potassium and magnesium, which are minerals you get from food. So I ate a banana and I was fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Any muscle cramps, I've done that research as well. And I'm like, oh, I need a banana. So... But
it's so simple. We're like, I should go to the doctor. I need some serious medical attention.
Yeah, I think something's wrong with my leg. And it's no, you just need to eat properly. But I think it helped me to, I don't know, look at my body differently, I guess. For some reason, I think thinking of it more of, I don't want to think of it as a machine, but just more of it needs certain things. And that's going to help the output of my life and my experience. And there's something about that is giving me some extra, I don't know, motivation to really take care of myself in a different way. Instead of just
100%.
Seeing how much I can get out of myself with, bare minimum. So,
well, yeah, because trying to get so much out of yourself is such a short-term game. And that was one of the most valuable nuggets I got from this conversation. And we hope you do too, that, a lot of us don't see our health in a long-term, with a long-term perspective. We're more just looking for our bodies to look a certain way by tomorrow, to feel better by the end of the day, to feel good about ourselves right now. And it really asks you to radically shift the way you view you and your body, which are not separable. And it's going to really inspire you to take care of yourself in a whole new way.
Yes. Hope you enjoy it.
Hello, Spiralers. Welcome back to the studio. We are so excited to be back, and we have such an incredible guest joining us today on the podcast. Ms. Kymber Maulden is a nutrition consultant and a women's health coach who takes somatic and trauma-informed approach to women's health. And she is here to help us understand the interconnected link between nutrition, somatic healing, trauma, and wellness. And we are so excited to have her expertise and energy on the show. Welcome, Kymber.
Welcome.
Hello. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
We're
so happy
excited.
we're so excited because we were just chatting a little bit before we hit record, and Kymber, Gina, and I have very shared journeys on what it means to truly be healthy. And I think, Kymber, you must have a personal story on how you personally learned that, obviously. Tell us a little bit about your health journey and what led you to be a women's health coach with a specific focus on nutrition and stress.
Yeah. Also, I just want to say that learning what it means to be healthy, I think, especially in this culture where we don't really have any like set norms, is a lifelong journey. So I definitely feel like I'm still on that. I haven't like arrived and now I have all the knowledge. But yeah, I struggled with my health quite a bit throughout my whole life. And it wasn't until like my late teens that I started to recognize it, but I recognized it through the lens of Western medicine. And so lots of psychiatric diagnosis, eating disorder, was put on a bunch of meds, was put on antibiotics for my skin. And so I was heavily medicated between like 15 and 20. And for a while I thought like that was the answer. Like, oh, the doctors, they have the diagnosis, they have the information, they have the prescription pads. So that must be the answer. It wasn't the answer. It didn't really get me very far. So by 20, I actually went off all of my medications, which I don't recommend anyone do cold turkey like that, but that's what I did. And then I took that, kind of reductive view of my body and health, and I just kind of moved it more into dietary, like veganism was where I went. And so I spent the first half of my 20s as a vegan, meditating a lot, like basically trying to spiritually bypass having a body.
Yeah. We talk about that a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a really common, I think it's a really common phenomenon for women, especially. And it wasn't until I think like, so during this time, my background is in early child development and birth work. And so I was doing a lot of really wonderful work with small children and babies, and but still was kind of like neglecting my own self, my own body. And it wasn't until like my late 20s when my health was just like at its worst because I was essentially starving that I had to start eating animals again. And what I noticed up until I started actually practicing nutrition was that I would get pulled from one dietary camp to another, even though I had the science training. It was like I was kind of blinded by the ideological, as we were talking about before we went live, like there's a lot of tribalism in the world of nutrition. And so I definitely got sucked into that quite a bit. And then it wasn't until I would say like, I'm 37 now. It wasn't until my early to mid 30s when I started to get really clear around how I wanted to practice nutrition. And then I wanted to look at it through the lens of metabolism, through the lens of energy metabolism, and even like more specifically through the lens of women's health and women's bodies, as distinct from men's, that I started to really understand. I started to really understand nutrition, I think, on a like much deeper level.
So it sounds like from the very young age of 15, you had a bunch of symptoms, right? And they weren't really checking for root causes. They looked at your symptoms, you said your skin or something like that. And I remember having skin issues too and being put on antibiotics as well. It seems like no one really wants to actually do the deeper work and figuring out what's causing these things. They just want to mask the symptoms. And so I'm a little bit curious actually what ended up happening when you went off of the medications, just for people listening and what they can expect before you were able to find your way and be able to find true wellness. And although that's an ongoing journey.
Yeah. I'll also say that like I had symptoms looking back since childhood, because I do have complex trauma. Like I have a higher ACE score. If you guys, I don't know if you know what that is. I can go into that at some point if you're interested. But now that I work with the nervous system and I work with trauma, I view health through the lens of nervous system function and potentially CPTSD. And so when you have an ACE score, when you have CPTSD, you have a higher chance of having chronic illness of any kind, of having dysregulation.
Right.
So now I can see that like, and this is a common story for a lot of women that I've worked with and that I've heard from in this culture, is that because menarche is such an intense time biologically, you're becoming a woman, you could potentially create another life. This culture doesn't really support women into that process. So if you already have some unstable metabolic issues or, trauma, and then you go through that process, that's when things can start to get very difficult. So the skin issues, the mood issues, And the main ways of approaching that is usually birth control pill, antidepressants, antibiotics for your skin.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're very, very common, like to the point where I've just worked with hundreds of women now, and a large majority of them went through that like pipeline.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of automatic. You go to the doctor and they just give it to you, right? Because again, so many women do that. I think the doctors, before you even finish talking about what your issue is, they just go right to doing that, prescribing that. I'm curious to know, because you did speak to supporting women in that kind of, transition into becoming a woman that can actually give birth. I have a daughter. She's turning 9, and she's kind of, going maybe into that stage where these different changes, especially hormonally, are going to happen. What are some things that we're missing in that support, in that transition? Like, what do we need, and why is that important that we do receive it in that way?
Oof, I feel like that's a big question, because it also involves like the culture. It's not just like individual issues, right? So I think having like a stable, secure base at your home, like having a home life where you can turn to your parents, you can turn to your mother as a girl, and being able to actually feel like your mother is a resource as your body changes and as your ideas of who you are change. Because I even more so, I think this is true for girls. Like in this culture, if you don't have a strong home base and a mother that you can turn to, or women in your life that you can turn to, you turn to the media, you turn to social media, you turn to. I mean, it was the 90s when this happened to me, so we didn't have, thank goodness, we didn't have TikTok and Instagram to tell me how I should feel about myself.
Yeah.
But we had Diet Culture magazine and like Nicole Richie and Kate Moss. Yeah.
Lindsay Lohan.
Yeah. And diet culture, right? So like I started dieting when I was like 13, 14. So I would say like just being that support, that strong support, like that feminine matriarch that your daughter needs, that she can look to when her body starts to change. And then providing her with information, helping her understand what's happening with her body, and so that she will turn to you maybe more so than she would turn to some potentially, more toxic avenues. And then I guess the other thing is providing her with nourishment. So like making sure she's eating enough. As young girls, we tend to mimic the women around us. And so if you are like a chronic dieter, or you're talking poorly about your body, then they learn that really early. Like, oh, that's how we relate to our body. We, denigrate ourselves in front of a mirror, or we're always on some new diet. And so that's like, even if you don't do that overtly, they pick that up.
Yeah. So I think this is so illuminating, Kymber, because what's coming up for me as you answer Gina's question is how little support I had, and how much, and how we're on that pipeline sort of automatically, like you talked about, where we look to the media, we denigrate our bodies, we do not get the proper nourishment because we're taught that our bodies are our worth and they need to be this small. And so it's so sad that when we look at most of the women who are conditioned in our society, we are receiving such bad information about what is truly healthy and how to be good to ourselves. And we're also watching women who my mom drank Diet Coke and ate bread. That was pretty much it, like as little as she possibly could, still to this day. So it's been such an uphill journey for me to find out what actually is wellness to me, because to me, I was fed so many images of what wellness was. And I thought it was basically just eating a bunch of plants and doing Pilates and being super skinny. So I tried that. I was vegan when I was 19 to 20. I wanted to always aggressively work out. I was doing everything the diet industry told me to do, and I was so unwell mentally. I don't think I could feel the physical symptoms as much in the past, as much as I do now. But at the time when I was younger, a teen, early 20s, I just felt a lot of mental distress. And so, of course, much like many people, I was sent to psychologists, and I was told to get a therapist. And I thought that I had like mental disorders. And it took me almost a decade to realize that I literally just needed to eat more. And so I'm curious for you to talk a little bit about what stress means to you now and how you manage it through nutrition for yourself and for your clients.
Yeah, for sure. And that was, thanks for sharing that. That was like, just the need to eat more is such a profound. Realization. So simple, right? But like so profound in today's climate. And as far as stress, so stress is a physiological demand from any external or internal internally, we have a lot of stress. Like cellular metabolism is a stressful process. So everything that happens in the body is going to require energy. It's going to require resources. So that's a really important key point, is that nothing in the body that makes us function and feel and think, basically exist as ourselves, is free. Like everything is produced out of something. And so you can run out of resources. And so that's like number one, is just like stress is a demand placed in the body, and then it's not having the resources to meet that demand. And that starts at like the most basic chemical level within the cell. And then, we also have like different forms of stress. So there's perceived stress, environmental stress, relational stress. It always ends up in the cell. That's a really important point, is that regardless of what kind of stress we're dealing with in life, if we don't have the resources to meet it, it will end up causing us physiological stress. That will mean, and that will mean that the body takes resources from other areas that are not directly related to survival to allocate those resources to survival needs. And so this is when we show up with like thyroid issues. Like we're always cold because the body is sending all of its energy and thyroid to the internal organs to keep us alive. Or we end up with like hair loss or premature aging, or these are all signs that the body is in survival state. It's chronically stressed. And so it's allocating its resources to where it needs to go for basic survival. And then acute, there's also a difference between acute stress and we can talk about what this means for nervous system functions and trauma as well. But there's a difference between acute stress and chronic stress. So like we have as a species, we have a pretty good capacity to handle acute stress. And that's like a whole physiological thing happens, right? Like we go into sympathetic dominant state and to get away from the tiger.
Right. Fight
or flight. Yeah. And so sugar gets released into the blood, adrenaline and cortisol go up, heart rate goes up, oxygen gets sent to internal organs. And so that's getting us into a state where we can flee or fight. That should ideally, like in an ideal society, that should be something that we experience here and there. And then the body brings us back down to a baseline, which is closer to parasympathetic. So that rest and digest. And then that's kind of where we live our lives. But what we're seeing is more and more people that are upregulated a lot of the time. So they're getting upregulated into sympathetic states and then either not really fully coming down much at all, which is like where you see the growing epidemic of anxiety disorders. Or you're seeing people come back down to a baseline that's like
far lower,
but oftentimes for a while, like the baseline is actually still too high.
Yes.
And so what tends to happen, now we have like a lot of people who are downregulated, like they're in like a protective state where their body is actually moving a lot slower. Their metabolism is slower. Their adrenals and thyroid are low. So that's a common component as well, but there's stages, right? And a lot of people get stuck in that stage where and I actually have been in this place myself, like where I was never taught regulation. And so I stayed in an upregulated state too much of my life, where I was just moving too fast and just, I think, triggered a lot more than I was running from a tiger a lot.
Yeah, we can relate. I think that's been us. And I mean, to your point about us observing our parents or especially our moms and their eating habits, it's also observing their stress, right? So I became very accustomed to being around people who were in a high stress state all the time. So my baseline was stress, was being very activated, always in fight or flight. And so we've talked about this on the podcast before, that for me to gear down felt extremely unsafe and unfamiliar. And then we tend to kind of recreate these environments where it's stressful again, right? And that's been another pattern. And that's just the body's way of trying to obviously stay safe. But I like that you talked about how it is kind of a process and a gradual stage that kind of readjusts us to the new baseline, because mine was absolutely like that. I think baseline at the beginning, I mean, when I did start to gear down, my body completely shut down. It's like all of a sudden I was so tired. And I swear I used to just never be tired. I mean, I was tired. I just couldn't feel it, right? I was like, oh, and then I would just create more stimulants, more things to kind of keep pushing me and giving me more of that adrenaline rush to keep going. So I just wanted to touch on that a lot of times we can recreate even the nervous system states that were modeled for us.
100%. I was just talking about this with a client, right before I got on this call. when we come into the world, we don't have a nervous system that's our own. We have the environment, the caregivers that we have, including when we're in the womb. We also, our nervous system is our mother's. And so there's years where we don't actually know how to regulate. We're an extension of our mother or care provider's nervous systems. And so that alone, like just from, learning about complex trauma and nervous system functions, it's just clear to me now that there's just a lot of us that are not fully regulated from very, very early on because our parents weren't. It wasn't a concept that anyone knew about.
Yeah.
And it was, a lot. It's very easy as a species to not have all of our needs met in this culture. There's things to stress you out. And if you don't have great resources for managing that, then, your baby and your children will inevitably be affected.
Yeah. Something that I have had to be very compassionate about myself, or toward myself about, has been that ever since I was a child, when I was born, there was a lot of stress in my home because I had triggered basically financial troubles for my parents. And of course, I'm not mentally conscious of that as a child, but I can see now that I have a deeper understanding of complex trauma, how that would contribute to my nervous system and how that would contribute also to my own inner stories about money and security and feeling safe. And I've noticed my most regulated friends, most of their parents, this is just like a common generalization. It's not true for everyone, but their parents are older. And it's just this weird thing that I've noticed where if the parents were older, they were usually more financially stable. Not always, obviously, there are exceptions. And there was not as much financial distress with the baby being introduced into the picture. The baby was not something to be stressing about. The baby was something to be celebrating. Not to say that if you have financial troubles and you have a baby, you're not celebrating your baby. But I know that I was born and it was like, oh shit, like we don't have money. Like that, like they were happy, but they were stressed. And it's something that I have to constantly come back to because when I think about my own dysregulation, sometimes I wonder a lot to myself, like, why is it so hard for me to regulate? Why is it so hard for me to manage my emotions? But I also look at my parents and I can see very clearly, I love them as people. They were incredible parents, but they also have a really hard time managing their emotions. And so I just want to talk a little bit about that complex trauma piece that you're familiar with and how it contributes to the way our bodies are responding and regulating, upregulating or downregulating now. And so that we can have our listeners experience a bit more compassion for what they may be going through emotionally in their lives.
Yeah, perfect. And that's a really great awareness and connection that I think, is a big component to my work. As I've moved more towards working with complex trauma, is just helping women recognize it and understand that it's like breaking the stigma around it and just understanding that it's something that was out of our hands. And, I think a lot of people don't fully even understand what CPTSD is and the common occurrence of it. Statistically, it's something like 64% of the population plus has at least one ACE score, which again, I had mentioned that stands for adverse child experience. And you can actually, it was a big study that put CPTSD on the map in a way because it looked at the correlation between early childhood adverse experiences and the likelihood that you're going to have like a whole slew of difficulties throughout life, including illness. And so the big difference between CPTSD and PTSD is that CPTSD is, it's developmental and it tends to be an ongoing process. So like you could have it anytime between birth and like, for instance, 10 years of age. And it usually is, it's a process, it's an attachment and developmental form of trauma because it tends to come about as a result of environmental failure. And by environmental failure, I mean like the care providers, poverty is a great example of that. Like I was raised really poor, and that stress, that survival stress of not having enough money is a really big problem for a lot of people. And children are expensive. So it's unfortunate, that's just a reality. You can have all the love in the world, but if there's financial stress, then the chances that you're going to have other ACEs goes up dramatically.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest, realizations was when I became a mom. And I started to understand why it was so hard for my parents to give to us in the way that we needed and to meet our needs because they didn't even have the means to meet their own needs. So it makes so much sense. I have so much respect for parents because it really is, you're trying to regulate multiple nervous systems all at the same time. And even between my husband and I, like he's on a journey right now to uncover a lot of his complex trauma. And as he's doing that work, again, of course, it's butting heads with like some of our parenting and the triggers that we get from our daughter. I guess I just want to normalize that for a lot of people because as I parent my daughter, and I, of course, aim to be very conscious in that, and I'm doing my own inner work, it still is. You only have so much to give. And in an environment where, let's just say we're all tired and exhausted and maybe haven't eaten, it's challenging for us to meet our child's need when we're not regulated. And I think with our parents not having really any access to this type of information or this knowledge, it just makes so much sense why they weren't able to give me what I needed. So although it doesn't change the fact that obviously caused some things that I wanted to repair and heal within myself, part of that healing journey was understanding that, they really just didn't have the means to do that.
Yeah. And I think that's a big component of being trauma informed or trauma attuned is that you understand that this is generational. This isn't just, and that to an extent, like everyone that you interact with has a nervous system and is doing the best they can with the capacities of their particular nervous system.
Yeah.
Like most people don't want to be dysregulated. They don't want to come off in certain ways. They don't want to have like personality disorders. There's just a lot that people are dealing with that a lot of times they're not even aware they're dealing with.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like what you said about normalizing, because I do think that like since learning the high likelihood or like high occurrence of CPTSD, I'm like, oh, wow, this is a conversation that we all need to be having.
Yeah.
Like this is a lens through which people, I mean, I work with women, so I tend to say women, but people, it's a lens through which we experience the world that a lot of people don't even know is there, that's filtered, that's affecting them. And it's, again, the big difference between CPTSD and PTSD is that CPTSD is internally like, there's something wrong with me. I should be ashamed because it's developmental and it's always turned inward when you're young. And then PTSD oftentimes is I'm unsafe. They can be overlapped. Like you can have both in both of those conditions, but PTSD tends to be something specific that happens to you that, shocks your system and you create these neurotags that says, I'm unsafe when this trigger happens. Right. And CPTSD is an ongoing assault to your ability to develop, which you absolutely have to make about yourself, because you can't say, oh, my environmental is failing me. My parents are addicts, or, you can't like tell yourself that and rationalize that when you're a child.
Right.
So you immediately and very unconsciously say, oh, there's something that I did. There's some way that I am that's causing this. It's my fault.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what that often leads to, at least this was my experience, was because I was traumatized growing up, there is kind of this commitment to like, I'm not going to do that to my kids, right? And then you have a kid, and of course, the patterns are so ingrained that you do tend to repeat these patterns, but then that kind of perpetuates the story that there's something wrong with me, and then it's my fault, and I'm so bad. And I guess that's why I wanted to normalize that, because we talk to a lot of moms who are like, I should be better than this, or I should know better, and I should be able to not react this way. And it's like, no, you really shouldn't. Based on what's happened, you're not going to know how to regulate yourself, especially when there is a screaming child that's upset and that's your child and you don't want them to be hurting. There's so many layers. And so I really do want to normalize, especially for any parent out there. But even if you're not a parent and you are being triggered by certain people around you, I think one of the most loving things we can do is release the expectation that we should know how to already do this. This is, in a lot of ways, a learned skill for us to be able to train our systems out of a program. And I think I used to really shame myself a lot for even needing to do this part. And now I really see it as a gift, and that this is not something wrong with me, but actually I think in a lot of ways has turned into a superpower, at least for me. So yeah, I just wanted to also normalize that piece.
Yeah, I think that's as someone who has worked with babies and small children, I'm going to be a late mom, and like an area that I'm starting to gear my business towards is late motherhood, because we're seeing this phenomenon in this culture where women are having less and less children. We're kind of breeding ourselves out of to extinction in a way. And I think there's different reasons for that. There's like women are not, taught to value motherhood. We don't live in a culture that reveres that. There's like a lot you can go into there. But there is one aspect which I think applies to me, because I've never been like a hardcore feminist that didn't want children. It's more just like the trauma piece.
Yeah.
Like more and more women are like, I need to work on myself. I need to heal myself. I don't feel like I'm healthy enough to have a child. And then you place these expectations on yourself that are so high that you may end up in your later years in the demographic of women that are really, really unhappy because they missed the boat there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just accepting.
Sounds like me.
I was just going to say, I didn't want to put you out there.
Literally sounds like me. Well, I'm curious then, and I kind of want to go back to nervous system as well, but how do we support women then through that awareness? Because I feel that there's a lot of women who have developed what I would call shameful awareness, where it's like, you're aware of like every single pattern and every single cycle you have to break and all these things that are going on within your own psyche. But it's not necessarily moving the needle forward. I felt like there was a period in my life where I knew a lot of stuff. I could talk circles around any therapist and coach about what I knew to be wrong with me and what I had identified and what I knew I needed to change. But in terms of creating long-lasting change, it has always been through the nervous system. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that, because you talked about how our baseline can become disrupted. How do we find that baseline again? And how do we actually create this awareness or allow this awareness to create true change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great questions. So in somatics, I'm sure you've heard the term bottom up. Mm-hmm. You're doing the bottom up work, you're doing top down work. And so where most of us start is top down. Like we live in a culture that is predominantly top down. It's what our institutions, it's the, everything is catered to top down learning, to top down engagement. And so I think for a lot of us, we actually start in the intellect, we start in the cognitive awareness around things. And so I would say, like, first of all, just understanding that there's a lot of information that we have to access through the body that we'll never be able to access through our upper cognitive functions. But we can still start there because that's where it's going to be safe for most women. So understanding more of the neuroscience can be like a safety net for a lot of women. Like understanding, because it does. Like I went through a program recently called Neurosomatic Intelligence, and it's really heavy into the neuroscience, and it goes through regulating your nervous system using applied neurology and actually working with the nervous system through doing neuro drills to lower the sense of threat on your brain is dealing with. And one of the things that I find so liberating about neurosomatic intelligence is that it's so neutral. Like you're literally just looking at your system. Like we take in inputs, we interpret them by the brain, and the brain gives us outputs. That's how we work. Like symptoms are inputs, behaviors are inputs, feelings and perceptions. Symptoms, behaviors, those are all outputs. Inputs would be like sensory inputs, cognitive inputs from externally and internally. Once you understand that, like once you have like some kind of framework and narrative for what's happening, it becomes a little bit safer to start doing more of that bottom up work. And I do think like having simple, easy, low hanging fruit tools that you can integrate into your days that will help you start to regulate because a lot of somatics, it's literally like, I've had clients that have come from somatic therapy and they're like, I'm just feeling everything all the time and I'm overwhelmed. Like I don't actually know what to do with all the stuff I'm feeling. So I do think that there's a process where you learn some of the neuroscience, you learn some of the basic education around how the nervous system works, right? So then you can start to recognize where you go and where you have gone, like nervous system wise, like where do you tend to get stuck? I've been doing this work for a long time, and I still, up until this neuro program, which was last spring, I didn't fully recognize that my lifelong pattern has been flight.
Yeah.
And now it makes complete sense. Like on like big picture level and also like small micro behavioral level, it makes complete sense.
Yeah. I think we've identified that within ourselves too. I think mine has been chronically fight.
Mine's fight. Yeah.
Fight.
Yeah. But recently in my late 20s, because I'm 30 now, but I would say like 28 to 29, I started going into like deep freeze, which was very unfamiliar to me. I felt like, what is going on? Is this depression? What's happening? Like, this isn't me. And I think the problem for the longest time was that I couldn't experience that state neutrally. I had a lot of culturally deep messaging installed in me about what that state meant about my sense of worth and my identity. And just a lot of things about myself. I really attached a lot of my ego to having a lot of energy. And even though I was in a fight or flight state, we actually reward that as productivity in our culture. So to experience its opposite was really dark and hard for me. But learning about the nervous system was an opportunity for me to see the state with a lot of neutrality and to actually see some value in the state as well.
Yeah.
Because I could see that my body is not trying to make me have a quote unquote bad life, although being in that state will color your thoughts in that way. But it was actually my body's way of preserving itself. And I want to actually go back to what we talked about originally, which was how actually discovering that I was chronically under eating in an effort to appear healthy and trim and beautiful or whatever, all these ideas I was conditioned to maintain. Realizing that I was chronically under eating was such a key piece because I didn't realize that food was directly tied to my anxious and depressive episodes. And if I had not realized this piece, I would have probably been medicated for the rest of my life because it was so chronic. But as soon as I started eating well, which did meet me with an onslaught of thoughts about what it meant and if I was going to gain weight and all this stuff, I had to work through that. But I realized there was nothing more valuable than feeling literally healthy and okay and regulated in my body. That became the North Star. Like how people say cash is king. I was like, regulation is king, right? I wanted to feel that in my body. So I was willing to do that work. But I don't think many women understand how eating regularly plays a role in their mental and physical health. I think we only think it plays a role in our aesthetics.
Or are feeling tired that day or not. It's very
I didn't even know that.
Really?
I didn't even know that food was tied to how I felt energetically. I really thought, because of the way I'd been conditioned, that food only meant basically aesthetics. It's you either eat a little bit and be small or eat a lot and be big. That's how basic my subconscious viewed food. I did not view food as fuel. And as you said earlier, as energy for my cell so that my body can handle the demands of stress more efficiently. Because I realize that if I have the energy in my cells to handle it, then I don't perceive it as stress, right? The body doesn't become stressed if it has energy. So I realized through eating more and providing myself more fuel, I could handle quote unquote more stress. But really what was just happening was that I was less stressed because the body could handle what I was asking it to do because I was giving it more. And so I'm just curious to know more about your journey with respect to that and your client's journey. What are you seeing when it comes to food intake and how changing that is creating a lot of positive well-being for people?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that is a really, really common pattern with women.
Yeah.
And that was that was my experience. I started dieting when I was 13 or 14. And that pretty much just meant and that was early 2000s. So it was not eating fat, eating very little carbs, eating as little as possible.
Yeah.
Eating
Literally.
a dry salad with lemon and fat-free chicken on it or something. The bare minimum.
No flavor.
Yeah. And what that can do is, especially, depending on where you're starting when you start dieting, that can push you into an almost an insane state. Your body is so undernourished that your mental health suffers, your ability to perceive the world in a way that's non-threatening, becomes your norm. And, or the way that your body, your brain's ability to perceive the world in a non-threatening way becomes more and more difficult. So you're constantly fighting against yourself.
Yes.
And so that was my experience of my teens and most of my 20s because I was vegan, aspiring raw foodist. And so it wasn't until I started eating animals again. And then that was for me, that was a huge, oh my God, I feel so much more grounded, night and day. And then I had another leap, I think, when I started to, practice more nutrition and see what works and doesn't work, and realizing that my ideological principles around carbs didn't really line up with my direct experience and my client's direct experience. So I would say most women that I work with undereat. I look at what they're eating and I see that they're actually dramatically under eating what they need to be eating. Some of them it's low carbs. For some of them it's low protein because of low animal consumption. For some of them, it's low everything. But just getting them to eat more is I would say is a foundational piece to my work.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for me to integrate other stuff if that baseline piece is not met.
Right. No, that makes so much sense.
And I'm kind of curious, what sort of symptoms have you seen initially when people have started eating more? Because I'm actually still on this journey of figuring out what is the right amount that I could be eating. And I'm curious to know if you dealt with this or your clients do. But the hardest thing for me is that with the more that I eat, I don't actually feel as energized, at least yet. I feel like that grounding energy is good because I'm not anxious. But it's almost like I was so used to using that anxiety to get things done. Like it made me feel like, let's go. Like I have power. Like, we have the coffee or whatever, and then we go for it. So grounding my body with more food, although I don't go into these crazy lows, I feel more stable. I just don't feel always as energized. And there is sometimes I feel like it's a drug to not want to eat again. Like I feel it. Like I can feel when I'm starting to get hungry that I'm like getting a little bit of that like flight energy. And it's so hard for me to temper that because I'm like, ooh, like I could use this spike of energy to like get a few more things done. And I know if I eat, I'm kind of like tapering it off. But there's a positive result obviously later. I don't have this crash like 2, 3, 4 days in the future. But I'm curious to know if that's common. And what sort of other things women can expect to see when they begin to fuel themselves properly and heal their nervous system.
Yeah, that's really common. So like what happens, I think what a lot of people don't realize when they're not eating, when they're fasting or under eating, is that your body always needs energy. It needs a lot of energy to meet the demands of your brain, and your thyroid needs a lot of carbs and protein, and all of the organ systems that we rely on so much absolutely have to have a lot of energy from food. So when we undereat, the body will naturally outsource that energy production to stress hormones. Always. So what I have found is that myself and many of my clients don't actually know what it's like to have energy from nutrients and from thyroid.
I don't know what that's like. I'm learning.
It's a very different existence. And I think it's really hard because we do live in a sympathetic dominant culture.
Yeah.
And so a lot of us, it's just the water we've swam in for so long that like it does show up as fatigue. It can show up as like being more tired because we have a brain association with energy feeling a certain way, a little edgy, a little like we're about to take flight. And then you add in the fact that about 80% of the population likely has a downregulated metabolism, meaning like they're slow and low. So they've already pushed the gas as much as they can push it and run through their minerals. Like I run mineral tests on all my clients, and they tend to more often than not be in the downregulated state, which is a protective state. It's where everything has slowed down for the sake of protecting your metabolism because it's just gone into a sympathetic state too often, too long. So when you're there, you're going to feel that energy dip more.
Wow. I mean, hearing the science is so key because I think knowing this you're able to excise like all the negative thoughts about yourself from it and just see the situation for what it is a bit neutrally. Because Gina and I both have, last year was about trying to eat more. And Gina, you were definitely on that journey a little bit sooner than me because I remember you being like, I've scheduled in that I have to eat. And I was like, oh, right. Forgot about that.
Yeah.
And it changed everything for you.
I mean, for me, it was sleep and rest. So I've dealt with chronic insomnia, which makes a lot of sense. And they're all connected, right? So when I don't sleep, I can't eat because I feel so nauseous from not sleeping. And then the more that I can't eat, the more that I don't sleep. And I also suffer from migraines. So it's all connected. And so I was going to just speak to Sam's thing of like, again, like our baseline of energy is that very intense kind of like almost jittery kind of like fried energy. Like that's what I used to think energy meant. Like I used to think that meant being energized was this chemically induced kind of like this high.
Wow.
And I was there for so long that I honestly thought that that's what was normal for me. Like I thought I was just a very peppy person. And we've talked about this on the podcast as well of really down, like kind of gearing down that nervous system. And there is a fear of like, well, who will I be when I don't have this crazy energy? But I mean, I'm still myself. And it's almost weird for me to think back to the version of me that was like very high on adrenaline all the time. But yeah, with the food thing for me, I think for me, I would only notice the food, like I said, in relation to just how tired I felt. I definitely did not connect that with my stress or my anxiety. Like I didn't think that I could feel anxious because I haven't eaten properly. Like I did not think that those were connected. I just thought physical symptoms of fatigue were related to that. Or like I said, my migraines. But when I started doing deeper therapy work in the past year, my therapist made it very clear that that's super connected. So I would just like love to know, like, where would somebody start? Like, how do we even know how much we need to eat? Because I think, so I've actually suffered from an eating disorder in my 20s. And when I finally decided to get like the proper help, I went to a hospital and they just put me with a dietitian. They just plugged in some numbers and they were like, I think they told me I needed to eat 3,000 calories. And I was like, coming off of eating nothing to jumping to 3,000 felt kind of a little bit too fast. I was kind of surprised that they were expecting me to do that. And I didn't end up following their advice at all. I found a different route. But I think there's just a lot of maybe misinformation about how much we're supposed to eat because everybody is also so different. So how do we uncover that and how do we go from not eating to, eating properly or eating enough for our needs?
Yeah. I think that's an important point that everyone is different and like bio-individuality is real. And I also see the bio-individuality piece get pushed really hard for people who are like, this diet is good for me. It might not be good for you, but it's good for me. And so I do think it's important to remember that we also all have some baseline needs that need to be met. And I would say like most women should be eating 2,000 calories a day. And that might sound really extreme, but if like I'm a nutritionist, not a dietitian, and that was a conscious choice. And I mean, I'm not slandering dietitians. There's all kinds of different dietitians in the world, but a lot of the programs in the training teach you to undereat. Like they emphasize undereating. Protein is just one example. Like the RDI, the recommended dietary intake of protein is so low. I would say it's like 45, 50 grams of protein a day. That's like baseline for a woman to survive. Like that's not if you're healing, if you're, moving your body at all, if you're pregnant or want to get pregnant. So what I see a lot is the pattern I see a lot is tissue catabolism, which is like a state where your body catabolic is breaking down, anabolic is building up. So most of the women that I see, they're in a state of breaking down. They're living their lives where their body's eating itself because it's not getting enough nutrients and protein is one of those big ones because the body does recycle protein. But because we've been inundated with this idea that protein does all these harmful things and we don't need that much, the vast majority of women are under eating protein and they're eating like low converting proteins, which is like all the plant proteins. So their body is eating itself. It will always start with the muscle because muscle is more metabolically expensive and it will leave the fat. So that puts your body into a naturally more stressed out state because tissue catabolism involves stress, the activation of stress pathways. That's one of cortisol's main jobs is to assist in the breaking down of tissue for the utilization of the nutrients in that tissue.
Wow.
So you will naturally have more cortisol circulating if your body's eating itself because you're not eating enough.
So you just get like a skinny, productive, anxious, like under eating person. I did know some of this and I'm obviously working on improving this relationship, but this is like really illuminating for me. And I'm sure so many people listening because I was fed so much crazy different rhetoric. I used to be a professional ballerina. And like, I remember hearing things like, essentially like the more you eat, the more you're going to have to work out. And so for me, I was like, well, I'll just not eat a lot so that I don't have to work out as much. But then I would be like, but then this must also be true. If you don't eat a lot and you work out a lot, then you're going to get really good results.
Doubling down.
That was, doubling down, the Aries in me, right? So that's what I was doing for a long time. Like I would say that was my life between ages 23, 22 to like basically last year. Like I was functioning in this, what do you call it? Catabolic state where I'm just eating my muscle. Yeah. And I would feel fine, but I was probably in that upregulated state where I was getting energy from the cortisol.
It can feel good.
And then, it can feel
really good until it doesn't.
Yes. There you go. Until it doesn't. So Gina knows, but I had states or periods of time last year where I was like, I cannot explain how down I was. It was so dark because my mind had never really been to those places and was not really familiar with that state of being. But I could not get out of bed. I mean, this is me being pretty vulnerable, but I could not get out of bed. I could not take a shower. I remember my dog whining so bad to go outside. And that was like the only thing I could do that day, was like manage to like get him outside so he could use the bathroom. And I was so defeated and lost because I thought like I really thought I was doing everything right. I'm like, I'm a productive person. I wake up early. I meditate. I work out. I eat healthy. And the biggest realization I had was like all this messaging I'd received about healthy was actually the opposite of healthy. And the evidence was in how I felt. I was like, how you feel is how you determine how healthy you are, not how you look. And I think that is so difficult for us because we're fed so many things on the media, right? We see an image and then we plaster the term healthy on top of it, but we have no idea of being able to discern how that person is like metabolically functioning. And so for anyone who's listening, you can look skinny and be very unhealthy. And something that I'm like trying to do a lot of thought work around within myself is that as I eat more, is learning how to accept a changing body, because I'm learning that maybe the shape that I'm in right now is not the healthiest for me long term. Although my mind likes it because it's been attached to it and conditioned to think that this is good, I am no longer willing to make the energetic sacrifice that is my body and like my muscle tissue in order to maintain the state. Well, frankly, it isn't even sustainable. So I'm sure you see this a lot with your clients where it's almost like, but then it's like the fear is like, my body will change. And you're like, yeah, but so will your energy and your long-term sustainability just as a human being.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And it's a really vulnerable topic for a lot of people, of just like what the results of our choices where it can take us. And I think that's, you touched on a lot of stuff there. One thing that you did say that I think is important to point out is that the appearance of health and what health looks like in this culture does not mean health. That's like a huge thing. Like I've had people, say like, you could, this is a silly thing, but you could show more of your body on your Instagram and give people an idea because I have a toned stomach or something. And I'm like, but I've had gut issues. Like that has nothing to do with my health to have a flat stomach. Like, so I'm sending a signal to a woman unconsciously, potentially, that if she looks like me, then she's going to be healthy. And that's like the last thing that women need to hear or need to think. And then also like understanding that even feeling good isn't necessarily health, because as a species, we're not long-term thinkers. And so a lot of us get roped into diets and fasting and all of these like fads because they leave us feeling really good at first.
Yes. Yeah.
And we're not very good at like looking, especially if you don't understand like basic principles of energy metabolism and take stress into account. You're like, where is this diet going to take me in 5 years? In 2 years? Wow. Like that's really important too, because a lot of us are, we get high when we're low carb. Like I've heard people say, I felt so great on keto until I just collapsed and my sex hormones were shit. So, having a little bit more of a long-term idea of health is, I think, really, really important for women so they don't end up in their 40s and beyond.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I think also a lot of people's goals are not really health related. They're more like vanity related, right? So it's kind of like it is meeting the goal because I'm going to look a certain way, but they're not taking in consideration, like you said, the long-term effects of you're going to feel really terrible. And I also think that I'm actually turning 40 this year, and Sam and I have recently talked about, kind of self-acceptance and what that looks like as we age and as we grow. And that, one day I might not have this hair and maybe my body shape is going to completely change. And I think that, I just think that it is such a hard thing to accept when there is so much narrative around how we should look. And I think honestly, even being an Asian woman, I think there is like just culturally this expectation that we should just naturally be small. And it's interesting because my relationship with food with my mom was very different. I didn't eat a lot growing up. I just didn't have an appetite. And so I was constantly force fed, and I was at one point, I remember they were like, if you don't eat, we're going to give you really disgusting tasting medicine to like make you hungry. And so I feel like my whole life has been learning how much I actually want to eat and how much how much I actually need. Because even now, it's so funny. I went to my parents' house for New Year's, and we make all these dumplings every year. And we were having like a joking conversation about how many we could eat. And my mom's thing every time, she literally stares at my plate every time we're at dinner. She doesn't do this to anybody else, just me. And she just watches how much I eat, not to make sure I'm eating less, but literally to make sure I'm eating more. And what was so funny was that day I actually did eat a lot. And then my mom was like, don't eat too many. And I was like, oh my God, like I will not be able to win with you. And so I think it makes so much sense why we have this very distorted relationship with food, not only with the media, but also just directly, as you said, with our parents and the messages that they're giving us. So, when it comes to eating 2,000 calories, I mean, just based off of what you're saying, I know I'm not eating enough protein, like for sure. But how do we know, like, even when we've eaten enough? Like, I mean, to eat 2,000 calories, is the messaging here then, even if you're full, you should keep eating anyway?
Yeah, that's so I actually don't go off calories as much. Like it's not I look more, I mean, I'll use calories as like a rough estimate, especially if I'm working with someone who has like a specific exercise. Like I work with my clients where they're at. But predominantly I look at macro ratios in types of foods, because what I find is that a lot of people don't eat the right ratios, and that actually really messes them up. Like they eat too little carbs, they eat too much carbs without an adequate protein to balance their blood sugar. So we didn't really talk about blood sugar at all, but like blood sugar is a baseline metabolic need that rolls over into your nervous system function. So I see, I think the larger culture is really concerned about high blood sugar and diabetes, prediabetes. But what I see far, far more in women that I work with, and has been a lifelong struggle for me, is low blood sugar. And that comes from just not eating enough, from dieting to where, because blood sugar is tied in with your stress, right? Because sympathetic states require more glucose. So we use up more glucose. And then the liver should ideally, like a healthy, well-functioning liver should store up to like 10 hours of glucose as glycogen, which is like storage glucose for when we're sleeping, when we, something would happen and we just couldn't eat, but predominantly when we're resting. For a lot of us, we don't do that. So this is like a common reason why we don't sleep well. The body wakes itself up because blood sugar drops and cortisol needs to break the tissue down to bring blood sugar back up. So making sure you're getting enough carbs, making sure you're getting enough high quality protein, and then getting not, too much fat. Because that's another one. Like I think women either like avoid fat, or once they get told that that's healthy, that they should eat healthy fat, so then they can overdo fat. So I think that like it's a process. It's not one of these things. It would be easier for me to sell my services if I had like A, B, and C. You start at A, you go to C, you're good. Like, but that's like not how it works with women, because there's so much more going on there than just eating well, just adherence to a particular diet. But I would say, just to quickly like tie up that point, I would say that even more important than the calories is looking at food consistency. Like if you have blood sugar issues, I say eat within 60 minutes of waking up, and even sometimes have a bedtime snack. So eating every 3 to 4 hours, which is like, scary and I think unheard of for a lot of people.
Oh my gosh. Literally my brain is like bedtime snack. Like what's crazy? I've heard and adhere to so many crazy things in my life. Like I've heard things like don't eat like 4 to 5 hours before you go to bed.
I've heard that.
So that when you're sleeping, you're like, I've heard things like you're really cleansing the body. You're not worrying about wasting that energy on digesting food. And like, I'll like follow I'm such a good rule follower. So if you give me rules, I will follow them. And I have done so much of my own personal research, not to very much success, but like on should I eat before a workout or after a workout? Like, I just want to know. And I'm realizing I just need to be eating consistently, like regardless of whether it's before or after. Like it just needs to happen. And I keep looking for ways unconsciously to I keep looking for unconscious reasons to not eat as much, like as if it's going to support my health. And I think another important thing we didn't go into deeply, but maybe we can now, is how so much of the rhetoric on especially fasting is done on men. Like anytime a man tells me, I'm like, that is not the same for a woman's body. Like we are hormonally different. We're preparing for babies. This is not good for us. I would love for you to like go into that.
Girl. Yeah. This is like my bandwagon, my soapbox. So it's not even just fasting. Like the vast majority of the health and this is Western medicine and like integrative medicine, which includes nutrition and exercise physiology, is based on studying men's bodies or male cultures in petri dishes. And this is starting to change, but it's still a big issue. And so we're all navigating like male-centric ideas of health and fitness. And I think just understanding that is really, really important. Like one of my main goals of 2024 is to live, but also practice my business from a more feminine state, which for me is slower. It's more parasympathetic. It's slower. It's softer. It's more aligned with what my female physiology needs. And that means like, that means self-attunement and also like adhering to or like catering to my higher likelihood of stress, because women are much more sensitive to stress than men are. So fasting is even more detrimental to women because we're more likely to have blood sugar issues. We're more likely to have low thyroid. We're more likely to have adrenals that have run amok, that are like out of their lane, like relying on stress hormones all over the place because we don't have enough energy. And part of that is just like our unique biological reproductive system. Like we absolutely require more to take care of life, to produce life. And so I used to be an advocate of fasting. And like now in hindsight, I'm just like, I didn't really understand the female body. Again, I was like practicing nutrition from a very male-centric lens. I would never recommend that now. Like that, even just recently, there's a fitness woman that I follow online. I think I just follow her because of like some business stuff she does. But she had this whole post about, myths that she used to believe in that she no longer does. And one of them was like that I need to eat breakfast and that I need to eat before I work out. And I love working out fasted, and that's fine for me. And I wasn't going to say anything like it's, but like, I was immediately like, I would love to just have a conversation with her about physiology. Like, cause I'm just like, where is that energy coming from? Like, if you haven't eaten, she might be, in the small category of women who has a really stable nervous system and a really stable metabolism and actually keeps that 10 hours of glycogen in her liver and it allocates it well. But most likely she's just to some extent piggybacking on stress hormones because she's sleeping that whole time. And then she's moving into a workout, which increases the rate at which all of your cells function, demanding more from you, right?
Wow. This is just, these are some things that I already had known, but it's kind of just helping me integrate a lot of these knowings on a deeper level. But something that I've been doing literally my whole life is working out without eating. Mainly because I did not know how attached I was to that feeling of like that stress, which kind of is like powering me through the workout. I'm like, well, if I eat, I'm just going to be like a blob on the floor. Like, I don't want that feeling, but I need to learn what true energy feels like and being fueled by food again. I think before I can even start working out, I've actually kind of been off the wagon of working out because I was traveling and stuff, but I noticed myself as soon as I came back into my routine, I'm like, need to work out. And the question always comes up, should I eat before or should I wait? And I always go with skipping it because it's my pattern. And I've just been told through so many different, probably unreliable sources that that's better for me. And my brain doesn't care whether that's true or false. I just believed it because I've said it so many times, but my body is starting to show me that that's untrue. And I'm letting my body be the truth teller rather than my mind or these sources. I'm really using my body as the experiment because I feel like my body's neutral. Like, it doesn't really care whether I do that or I don't. It's just going to show me what the results are regardless. And I have just been shown over and over, and so has Gina, that chronically undereating in an effort to quote unquote be healthy is actually the least healthy thing that I've been doing for myself over the last decade. And it's catching up. And so if you're not 30 yet, just know it doesn't go forever. Like, I really thought that I'm just good eating this much and I have this much energy to work out and do all my things. And I like hit a wall at some point, and that was really hard for me just, mentally and egoically, because I was like, what's happening to quote unquote me, right? But I'm learning to include my body in the equation, not just my mental desires. And I've realized that having any sort of mental desire or goal or ambition for something is nothing without having my body regulated there to house me. And so this has been such an incredible conversation, because I think so many women are going to be empowered to realize that what they put in their bodies has a direct impact on mental and physical health, which are interlinked. We can't even separate those. And I think for the longest time, we've been conditioned in a culture that tries to separate mental and physical health as if those are totally unrelated, and to treat them as if they're unrelated, which never looks at the underlying causes, which is that they are completely interconnected. And treating them as such has led me to be an actually healthier person.
Yeah. And I just wanted to name, because I think for Sam, her lack of eating did come from trying to be healthy. That was not my motivation at all. I'm not somebody that really was aiming to be super healthy or to work out a lot. Like I'm starting to create movement in my life. But for me, it was strictly because I honestly just didn't think I needed to eat that much. I was a busy person. I had a very busy business, especially when I became a mom. It just was not a priority. I would make my daughter's breakfast, I would make her lunch, and I just wouldn't eat. Not because I was trying to be skinny or because I was trying to not eat. I just honestly did not factor that in as anything that was important, because I could function. I could go my whole day without eating. And I was like, I clearly don't need to eat. I used to think I'm not hungry in the mornings, which was true, but there's a reason why I wasn't hungry. Can you speak to that maybe? Because I think a lot of people think that. So yeah, I would love to hear your riff on that.
Yeah. And that's a good point too, that like a lot of women undereat because they're busy, they're in flight, they're distracted. They've never been taught the importance of it, at least not in a way that was like something that they would take in and really integrate. And then as far as the morning, that's a huge one. Like that's something that I have to work with the vast majority of my clients, is actually building up their morning appetite. Because what happens is, like, as cortisol starts to rise, usually around 4, it starts to rise, and then it peaks like an hour after you wake up. Everything in your body is speeding up. All of the cells within all of your organ systems are speeding up, and they require more glucose as they speed up. If you don't have any stored glucose, then your body will always dip into stress hormones. Like that's how it works. And so if you're someone who is chronically under eating, you most likely won't have an appetite in the morning because you've already been running off of stress hormones for quite some time. So actually one of the things that I have gotten a lot from women is once they start eating more, they want more food. Like you actually build your appetite because suddenly your body comes back online, and those signals that have been suppressed suddenly come back up.
Yeah.
And that can be scary.
Right, but then, the diet crazed person is like, no,
I don't want to be more hungry.
We're like, well, what's going on? Like when I was eating less, like, okay, good. And now that I'm eating more, I need to eat more. It feels like the opposite of what we've been conditioned to, the opposite way we've been told to function.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really sad. I think that, like you said something earlier about like the messaging that if I eat more, I need to work out more. And that there's like a heartbreak there for me of like how many women live in this state where they think they need to earn their nourishment. They need to earn it to be nourished. Like they don't just inherently deserve to be a well-nourished woman. They actually have to work their ass off in order to deserve food. And in the process, keeping themselves as small as possible. It's really sad. That's like the state of a lot of women. I mean, I'm sure there's men that have that as well, but I genuinely think like statistically, this is a problem that affects women far more than it affects men.
Yeah, I'm realizing this conversation, my thing was definitely the obsession with like time. I was kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to make more meals and actually take time to eat lunch. Like I don't have enough time. And so I think that's another factor that I'm sure you can speak to.
It's a cultural problem. Like we don't live, like I'm a business owner and I work in the wellness industry and I have that. Like as I start eating more, it's like, oh, I spend more money because the quality of food I want is high. And then I have to pair it all. And I'm like, this is just, and it's like, we're living in a time where women live isolated lives. They do their own thing. They're independent. They're the sole people cooking for their families oftentimes and working. And it's like, there's the joy. And then you have all of these restrictions and dietary rules and food fear and all that on top of it. And it's like, we're not living in the red tent era where women all banded together and cooked together. And so it's like not easy. So also like having compassion for yourself and like remembering that it's not easy to be a modern woman because you're expecting yourself to do it all. And the pace at which you're expected to function in that is not nourishing.
No.
Yes. Something you said earlier that is my intention for this year is to move about my life and business in a more feminine way, which basically to the regular untrained eye looks like I'm just not doing a lot. And that's been really hard for me because I feel as if I had really built this business on an unconsciously male-centric sort of patriarchal paradigm. It really required me to act in ways that were not in alignment with my body, but in pursuit of like a greater goal, right? It was like, that's okay. Like we have bigger things to pursue, or like, whatever, we'll rest later. And I'm just realizing how damaging it was. And I just really started feeling not very good towards the end of the year. And I was like journaling before 2024 started and thought, my success now is me feeling truly healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that it's going to require me to really change the way I operate. And I think that is going to be a threat to a lot of people's sense of self. But if you don't do it now and do that work, the inner work on yourself, your body will break down and force you to. And I think that's what we see with a lot of women who have chronic illnesses or having fertility issues. It's like your body's going to, like you said, get that fuel from other places. And it's your own body. And so if you don't make these changes now, you'll just simply be forced to later, is what I'm trying to say. And I'm sure you've seen that pattern.
Yeah, and I've experienced that too. I mean, I'm definitely like managing a level of burnout from scaling my business very quickly. And then that's a nervous system thing too, like running a business,
100,
managing money, managing like a new level of financial, it's a lot for your nervous system. And if you're not well regulated and you don't have, systems in place and things in place to really like hold yourself in that expansion, then you will go back to a more contracted state and your body will force you to do that. If your system isn't strong enough. So I definitely say like, take it from me, like you don't want to be burnt out, like that feeling of being burnt out and having to like slow down your life because of your energy, you're bumping up against limitations you didn't previously have or didn't realize you had. You don't want to get to that point. If you are at that point, like it's important to surrender, like not to tap the gas harder, because in this culture, I think that happens. We hit energy limits and we don't know we're down regulated. So we just keep pushing on the gas. But it's a call to slow down. And if you haven't reached that yet, just know that you will if you don't slow down.
Yeah. Sometimes I do think you have to learn the hard way because I don't think you'll believe it until you experience that. I mean, I was on a chronic just cycle of burnout. And then I was like, I feel better. And then burnout again. But those burnouts became a lot closer together. Like the frequency started to increase so much more. And again, as a mom, it was like I was able to notice so much quicker that I was in that burnout stage because of the way that I was even responding to my daughter, right? So thank you for pointing to that. I think before we kind of close off, I would love to kind of know where could somebody start? Because of course they can work with you, they can, read a lot of your content online and things like that. But aside from that, like where should they start? If this is all very new to them, where can this person start?
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on where they're at, like what they're currently doing, what state their health is in. But I would say foundations. I would say, look at what you're eating. Are you eating enough? Are you look at, potentially rules you have that you're living by when it comes to food. Like I don't eat, I've been told not to eat 4 hours before I go to sleep. That's a hard rule.
Right.
It's general and may not at all help me, but I'm going to follow that. Or I don't eat dairy, or I don't eat cholesterol, or I don't eat sugar. Everyone has food rules these days. I mean, you don't even have to be like
so true.
On a nutrition kick. You could just you could get some subliminal message that you shouldn't eat something and you stop eating it. So look at like how you're eating and decide, am I actually eating in a way that's supporting my physiology because I'm eating enough and I'm eating all 3 macros, which is like a radical thought these days to eat all 3 food groups. And then just look at how your health is like get really genuinely honest with yourself around like, how is my health doing? Like, am I stressed? Am I checked out? Am I avoiding? Am I just like watching lots of shows or TVs or focusing outward because I don't feel good and safe in my own body? So I think that's always going to be like where a person wants to start is like actually getting clear on what's going on with them.
Yeah, that's a beautiful, I love that because it really just starts with awareness, right? Just starting to even notice, what are my eating habits? Where did I even get this from? That was super helpful. Thank you so much. Now, our final question for our guests is always related to the title of our podcast, which is Spiraling Higher. And, we even Sam and I, and this is our third season in this podcast, and we're still spiraling through some of the same themes that kind of keep circling back from newer perspectives. So we would love to hear what is the most common theme that you've spiraled through your life and that you continue to spiral through. And I know our audience will learn a lot from this, I'm sure.
That's a good question. I think it's safe to move slowly is a really big one. And that ties in with everything we've talked about, like the food, eating more. You actually do have to move slower because you're digesting. You're actually digesting more often. And so, it's safe. I actually have a tattoo on my back, on my left-hand shoulder blade that says it's safe to rest. And I wasn't even thinking necessarily nervous system. I got that before I did any nervous system trainings. I just like,
your subconscious
knew. I got the word rest. I got the word rest. And then one day I had this like realization that I wanted it safe to rest. And so I used to shift it. So it's like a constant reminder to me, like you don't need to be in flight. Like you can create the safety to slow down.
Yes. Amazing.
That's huge. Thank you so much, Kymber. I know that our listeners are going to feel like, what? Mind blown after this and really be looking at themselves more deeply, which is what we really intend for them to do. That with every episode and with every guest we bring on, that we bring a little bit more awareness into their lives, that they can live healthier, fuller, more expansive lives. And so you brought them that light today, and we're so grateful. Let us know before we close off here where they can find you and learn a little bit more about the relationship between somatics and nutrition.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I was honored to be here. And as far as finding me, you can go to my website, which is kymbermaulden.com. And you can also find me on Instagram. I'm also on Facebook, but I generally don't like Facebook, so I ignore it. I tend to spend most of my time on Instagram. So that's
perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. So we'll make sure Kymber's link is in the show notes so that you can go find her and ask her any questions. But until then, we will see you in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this honest conversation. We hope it brought you peace, clarity, and a little bit further along your spiritual journey.
If you loved this episode, it would mean the world to us if you left us a 5-star rating and a review so we can bring you more conscious conversations, spiritual topics, and guests.
And we lovingly invite you to join our free Spiraling Higher community by clicking the link in the show notes to continue this healing dialogue and share with us how this episode impacted you.
Come on in, introduce yourself, and meet your conscious besties in a safe space for healing conversations between us and other like-minded people on their healing journey.
Here's to Spiraling Higher.